Are you ready to learn everything you know to finish a mix from the absolute beginning all the way to finalizing a mix? Well, welcome to this mixing series where we're going to go over every single step of a mix together as we mix a song from the very beginning all the way to a finished mix. And before we dive into that series, I'm going to break this up into many videos. We're going to talk about having the mindset of a mixer. Hey yo, it's Alex from My Music, and as always with this channel, it's my mission to help you, the artist, produce themselves by developing their mindset, expanding their creativity, and connecting to their inner artist in a deeper way. And in this video series, we're going to go everything you need to know in order to be able to mix your own music and approach your mix with a structure, a process, a framework, and think about it like a mixing engineer. So before we actually dive into the DAW and look at our session and the song we'll be working with and move through it, let's actually talk about what is the role of a mixing engineer. What is the role of mixing? Like, what is our goal when we're mixing a track? And it's very important to define what the goal is so you can know if you're getting closer to that goal and when you've hit it. Because if we don't have a clear objective to hit with our mixes, then it's very easy to get lost in the sauce where we're just changing the sounds of our different tracks. We're adding processing, but we don't really have a direction. We're kind of meandering with all of these different tools, and we make things sound different, but not necessarily better. So we have to define what is better. All right, so number one, let's talk about the primary function of a mixing engineer or the mixing phase in the production process. And the number one goal of a mix is to enhance the impact on the listener through the sonic potential of a song. So basically you're taking a song and you're just enhancing it so that it has more impact for what the song is already intending, and you're just bringing it out that extra 15% at the end to really have an impact on the listener. And just as important as defining our goals within the mixing phase is defining what the goal is not. And what's not the goal while we're mixing is getting, again, lost in the sauce. And what does this mean? This means getting lost in EQ tricks, compression tricks, any kind of processing techniques, and hyper-focusing on that, because at the end of the day, nobody cares about what your vocal chain is, okay? Nobody cares what kind of processing you've done to your mix. All they care about is how it sounds and how it makes them feel. And knowing that, we know what the main goal of a mix down and the mixing phase is to enhance the emotional impact of a song on the listener. And yes, we do use processing techniques. Yes, we do use tools and all these cool tricks. However, those fancy processing tricks and techniques are not the goal in and of themselves, okay? They must serve the higher goal of actually impacting the listener. All right, and the second thing to talk about before actually starting a mix is to think about the hierarchy of quality. And what this means is that there's a definite hierarchy of different parts of the production process in terms of importance towards getting a good sounding mix. And let's quickly go over this hierarchy of quality, because getting this down is going to impact your ability to get a pro mix the most versus getting just something subpar. All right, so within this hierarchy, we have 5 different steps, and the bottom step is gear. So don't get me wrong, gear is necessary, a certain amount of it, and it is fun to explore with new gear and new toys and play around with it. However, no amount of gear is going to make a great sounding mix. The gear in and of itself will never be the answer to you getting that sound that you want. It's how you use the gear that matters. It's not so much the what of your decisions, meaning what kind of gear you're using. It's more so the why. Why are you using this piece of gear, this kind of processing on a track for a particular purpose? All right, and I hear this a ton when I'm talking to aspiring music producers all over the place, is that they say that their limitation to getting a sound that they want or the music that they want is the gear. And I'll be straight up with you that the gear does not matter, because I've seen people with all the gear under the sun who have still yet to finish any music and still don't make great mixes, versus people who have very minimal amount of gear but know how to use it to an expert level, and they can create amazing music, amazing mixes. So that tells us that the gear is really not that important. All right, the next step up from gear is processing. Okay, so this is using our EQs, using compressors, saturation, reverbs, delays, techniques, all that stuff. It is important to understand how to use our tools and techniques to get the result that we want with our mixes. However, no amount of processing or mixing techniques will make up for the next things that are more important in our hierarchy, which we'll get into in a sec. So yes, it's important to know how an EQ works and how a compressor works. And if you want to learn that, I've created a tutorial for both of those, going super in depth into both of those processors. So I'll link them in the card above if you want to check them out. And it is important to know these things. However, those things in and of themselves, again, will never give you a good mix. Okay, it's not the tools, it is the decision behind the tools, and it is the quality of what you're working with that will actually dictate most of your mix. So let's step up to the third step of our hierarchy, which is source sound, okay? And this is now we're getting into things that actually will influence your mix the most. And this is paying special attention to the quality of your source sound material. So if you're recording vocals, if you're recording a guitar amp, a bass amp, an external synthesizer, even if you're using in-the-box plugins for sound design, for whatever it may be, drum instruments, samples, you want to make sure that the quality of your sounds and the matching of all of your sounds together sound great already, okay? Because it will be extremely difficult to make a mix with poorly recorded source sounds or poorly selected samples sound great if it doesn't sound good already. And I can't drill this home enough. Pay special attention to capturing the best sound quality that you can going into your session right off the bat, and also selecting the best instruments to work together right off the bat before you start mixing. Because if you can swap out a sample or two, or change in an instrument for another, or even re-record some parts with better miking technique or different mic to get the sound that you're after that fits well with everything else right off the bat, it's going to make mixing so much easier. Because if your source sounds are poorly recorded and they don't sound good together already, then you're going to have a real tough time making that sound good in the mix. There's this saying that goes around that one does not simply fix it in the mix. That is an amateur move to say that you're going to make it sound good in the mixing phase. Okay, you're going to make it sound great in the mixing phase, but your session already has to sound good right off the bat. And if you want a little bit of insight into what a pro session sounds like, I invite you to find some pro stems. All right, so find the tracks of a professionally recorded session and give special attention to how the source sounds sound amazing right off the bat. You would say that the mix is already 80 to 85% there before even lifting a finger from careful sound source recording and sample selection. So paying special attention to capturing great source audio as well as finding sounds that work well together right off the bat will be the best thing that you can do to make your mix sound amazing before even getting into any of the mixing process. All right, so let's keep moving up our rung, and the next step higher than source sound is performance. Okay, and all of these steps are a hierarchy, okay? So they all start from the top of most important all the way going down to the least important thing that's going to affect your mix. So let's talk about performance. So performance is capturing really expressive recording. So whether you're recording a vocalist, you want to make sure that your vocalist is really putting themselves into the tracking process. Same goes for if you're recording guitars or basses or drummer. You want to make sure that you're capturing the absolute best performance that you can with all the nuance and dynamics of a human performance. All right, and same goes for if you're making electronic music. You want to make sure to capture awesome performance, okay? So even if you're programming in parts with the mouse or you're sequencing them with machines, whatever it is, you're using samples, loops, you want to make sure that those samples, those loops, those performances that you're programming have a good performance, meaning that there's nuance to it, there's some detail, there's some groove to it, some push and pull that interacts with whatever your song is already doing. And the reason this is so important is that no amount of mixing will make up for a lack of performance or a lack of conviction in the song recording process, okay? In whatever takes you're making and whatever parts you have. If all your parts feel stale and flat and just don't really move well together, they don't have some sort of oomph or some push and pull to them, you can't really inject that from a mixing standpoint. Okay, you can only enhance what's already there with a mix. All right, so let's move to the top of our hierarchy, which is songwriting. And I can't drill this in enough. This is so important, especially if you're an independent artist, an independent music producer. You're doing everything. You're writing the music, you're composing, you're editing, you're mixing, you're mastering. You have to pay special attention to your arrangements and your songwriting, because a great song will stand the test of time. Just think back of all of the influential music that has stood the test of time, which might not have had the best sounding production. However, how much music today has the best sounding production but has horrible songwriting and is forgettable? Another thing that makes songwriting so important is that the way that you arrange your song, meaning what notes your bass is hitting, what frequency ranges your various instruments are sitting within inside your arrangement, will impact how easy it is to mix or not, right? A classic example is having, let's say, a bass line doing something, as well as an instrument layer such as a piano, maybe playing bass notes at the same time as the bass. So just from a compositional standpoint, there will be some masking going on when the bass is holding down the low end and you have a piano part that's playing all sorts of bass notes in its performance as well. Then when you get to the mixing phase, it's going to be so hard to get a clear low end and a clear mix overall. If you have so many low end frequencies and instruments competing for the same space, it's going to be a headache to try and mix. So before you actually go into the mixing phase, pay special attention to maybe remove some of the bass notes from a piano part that's playing at the same time as a bass line, or play around with shifting different parts of your song up or down an octave to give room for the other instruments in your arrangement. And just simple moves like moving something up or down an octave, or moving the timing of certain notes so that they line up together, can make your mixes so much easier to do, because the material you're working with has been well structured and well arranged. If you take anything from this video, take away that songwriting is number one. If you can master songwriting and master arrangement and composition, and make your compositions naturally sit well together in terms of frequency and arrangement and harmony and frequencies and all that stuff, it's going to make the mixing process significantly easier, because you're not going to be having to fix a bunch of issues that could have been fixed in the arrangement and the compositional phase. All right, and lastly, number 3 on our mixing mindset before we actually get into mixing is to mix with your ears and not your eyes. A lot of the tools that we use in the DAW for mixing gives us awesome visual feedback, such as an EQ, a compressor. It shows you what it's doing with levels. It shows you what it's doing with a spectrum analyzer, which is awesome. However, a trap that a lot of people get stuck in is they start mixing with their eyes. They start mixing with how the graph looks. They start mixing with how the compressor looks like it's acting and how much gain reduction you're getting. And that is a huge mistake, because it doesn't really matter what things look like. What matters is how it sounds like, because everybody else who's going to be listening to your music is not going to be seeing any EQ graphs. They're not going to be seeing anything that's happening under the hood. All they're going to be experiencing is the final product by listening to it only. Okay, so when we are mixing, we always have to make decisions with the ears instead of the eyes, or with processes, with techniques, okay? Techniques and frameworks are great. However, every single song is different. Every single song has different frequencies that are living together, and different parts, different styles, and you have to treat each song like its own thing and always use your ears. And I say this with a caveat, is that it does take time to train your ears to be able to distinguish different frequencies and hear how the tools are working. So if you're just getting started, don't hesitate in using the tools to help you learn what they are doing and help your ear kind of understand what's happening as you're changing the sound with various tools. However, once you got a grip on how EQs work and where the different frequencies lie and how compression kind of sounds, how it affects whatever track that you're throwing it on, then you want to hyper focus on listening and not hyper focusing on what the tools are telling you, because at the end of the day, all that matters is how it sounds. If you're planning on following along with this whole mixing series as we mix a song from beginning to end, I would encourage you to look at this other video that I made going over my top 10 tips for mixing, just so you're aware of some of the best practices and things to look out for before we go ahead and start mixing. So if you're interested in seeing that, I'll link it in the card above. And hey, if you're just getting started with music production and feeling completely overwhelmed by the process, or if you've been at this for a while but are having trouble finishing tracks, or hey, if you just want to get a glimpse inside my personal workflow, I've created a super easy to follow 7-step framework that takes you from your very first ideas all the way to a finished arrangement and a finished mix and master. And it's super handy to have around as a printout in your studio. So if you're interested in grabbing that, you can find it in the description below. All right, and that wraps it up for this intro to our mixing series. I hope that it was useful. I hope that you got a context as to what the goal of a mixing engineer or the mixing phase of your production process is by going through this video. And let me know in the comments below, do you mix your own songs right now? Have you tried mixing it? Is there part of the process that you're hitting a wall with? I'd love to know in the comments below. And with that said, I will see you in the next video of this series as we start our mix.